Good afternoon, everybody. Like Seth said, my name is Blaise Kemna, and I'm Communications Coordinator here at Center for Suicide Prevention. Before I get going here, I would just like to reiterate Seth's appreciation for your attendance today, your interest in Buddy Up. I've had a few interactions in the chat here already, and it looks like we've got people from across Canada, which is very encouraging to see. Obviously, we are a national campaign with over 700 champions across Canada. And so it's nice to see that representation here today, as well as some familiar names from a few of the events that we've been going to. A few names I recognize that signed up from AgSmart here in Olds, Alberta a few weeks ago. So welcome to you all. As we shift to our next portion of the info session, it is my pleasure to introduce one of our champions, Deborah Murphy. So Deborah is the editorial content specialist at Alberta Beef Producers, which, among other things, provides beef producers with real-time information on market reports, research and technology, global affairs, and more. Deborah, as part of this role, and you might hear a little bit more about this in our conversation, also produces a podcast. And in preparation for this today, we had a good laugh because she's used to being in my position on the other end of the questions. So it's a little bit different when you're having to answer the questions, but we're obviously very grateful that she's decided to participate with that role reversal. So she's also been a committed member of our Buddy Up Advisory Committee, which, as Seth mentioned, helps guide the campaign. We do really want it to resonate with people, and so we make sure that everything we're doing is vetted by that committee. So welcome, Deborah, and I'll get you to come on camera here.
Hello, thank you. Let me just turn my phone down.
Love it. Love to see that. In fact, I don't even have that on my phone, so you're beating me. Yeah, so thanks again for taking the time to do this, and we'll get right into the questions. Before we begin, just a quick reminder to our audience that if you have any questions for either myself, Seth, or Deborah, please feel free to send them to the chat, to Seth in the chat there throughout. So awesome. Without further ado, first question. So for those who don't know Deborah, tell me a little bit about what it is you do.
So you kind of mentioned it off the start a little bit in that I do have a podcast that's new to Alberta Beef Producers. But generally, when people ask me that question, I say I work in agriculture media. That means I write stories, I interview people, and I also do some cheeky social media posts as well. Oh, but also
Awesome.
On the side of that is a very important thing that I also have to mention is that I live on a farm. And so I don't just work for Alberta Beef Producers, but I also produce beef myself. And that I think that's given me a pretty unique couple of perspectives to offer Buddy Up.
Definitely. And several of you might have noticed during the presentation, actually, that the character Seth featured was our Clay character.
I love Clay.
Who is an agricultural producer and who also Deborah has her background there. So maybe Deborah, as a generalization, living in that community, working in that community, can you give us a little bit of a sense for what the male culture, again, in broad strokes, might be like within that industry?
Yeah, I typically don't love the word generalization, but I think we're all adults here and we know that people will fall outside of this, what I'm about to say. There was a recent TikTok video by a physician, I think, and he was joking about what it takes for a farmer or rancher to go to the doctor for a physical ailment. And essentially he said, you know, if you get a phone call from a doctor, from a farmer or a rancher, like it is emergent, you have to take care of that right now, because they'll put it off. You know, oh, it's just a kidney stone. I don't have to go in yet. I can deal with that on my own. And I think sadly that's still the case for a lot in the ag industry. And while we laugh about it on TikTok, it has a big impact. And so if it takes a catastrophe for men, especially in this community, to seek physical help, what about mental health? And I think Seth mentioned isolation as being a really a crucial factor in why men are more likely to die by suicide. And I think when you're already working in isolation, it's all the more easier to get into that rut. So yeah, I think there is this general tendency for men in agriculture to think strength is not asking for help, when I think most of the people on this call would agree that strength is asking for help when you need it.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, you sort of covered a bit of that in your answer there, but shifting maybe back to Buddy Up, what prompted you to get involved with the campaign itself?
Don't you hate it when people side rail your questions? They do that on my podcast all the time. So what prompted me to get involved? I think the first time that I saw Buddy Up, I saw all those amazing personas, and it was, during COVID, and during COVID, producers, and when I say producers, I mean farmers and ranchers, were also dealing with drought, and drought is a huge problem. It was a widespread problem, and a very dramatic one. And so you were seeing a lot of mental health concerns. And actually in 2021, a report came out saying that suicide ideation in the farming community was 2 times higher than the whole community in Canada. So there were a lot of things kind of on my brain at that time, and I thought, you know what, we need a farmer, a rancher. And so I reached out to Buddy Up to say, hey, can we work together? This is something I'm passionate about. And it turns out there were others passionate about it as well. And so that was kind of my first interactions with Buddy Up, was helping to inform the persona that became Clay, and also then being invited to join those advisory committees. And I think, like so many of us, that was all preempted by my own mental health struggles, and people in my community seeing their mental health struggles, and also, dealing with a loss to suicide as well.
Well, yeah, thank you for sharing that, Deborah. Obviously, very sorry for that loss. But as you said, Clay has been a huge piece of kind of your involvement with Buddy Up. Maybe just on that note, as a bit of an aside here, as Seth and I have gone to a few ag shows to promote Buddy Up, and specifically Clay, we have had a bit of a chuckle because there have been a lot of men who have come up and stood right next to this big life-size poster of Clay who look exactly like him. So,
oh, mate. Oh, that makes me happy.
As far as the development of it goes, I think we've definitely created something that
well, I think we were both laughing and getting ready for this interview too, because I was wearing plaid and I'd forgotten I had Clay in the background. And so here we were, 2 farmers in the screen. So yeah, I'm glad that it's resonating with people, that he is resonating with people.
Yeah, that's right. I think we both forgot our dress code memo here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, maybe tell me a little bit past sort of the development of Clay here. How have you and your group engaged with the campaign itself, perhaps during the month of June and things like that? What sort of things have you done to be involved?
Yeah, I think it was June of last year. We wrote sort of just a general piece for our website, which is ABP Daily, about Buddy Up. And then following that, we've done an article in our print magazine introducing Clay, and I'll just include that here in the chat, and also a podcast from ABP as well, where we talked to Akash Asif of CSP, and we talked about Buddy Up, and also agriculture and mental health. I've personally also worked a little bit on it, just putting posters up in my community where I think they'll be most noticed. So there's an agribusiness, a local agribusiness, that I put up a poster and gave some stickers. And then at the community's gym, there's a separate entrance from the main building and for the gym, and there was nothing on the board there. So like Clay is up front and center there now. So that's a few ways that I've done it kind of on my own, and the stickers and stuff has been awesome. And I think Seth mentioned it, where you kind of combine campaigns. Ag Safe Alberta currently has like a safety campaign. So I ordered some stickers from them, and then I included the Buddy Up, some of the Buddy Up stuff, and gave it to some of my peers in the agriculture community as like, you know, if we can talk about on-farm safety, we can also talk about mental health's role in that. So those are a few different ways that I've engaged with the Buddy Up campaign.
I love it. I love it. And maybe I'll just park there for a second, because I think we often, as we're sort of telling people about the campaign, we really try to emphasize the freedom of what being a champion means. That obviously there are no minimum expectations, so you can do as much or as little as you'd like. And I think a huge intent behind even this sort of little series of interviews that we've been doing here is to get people's wheels turning as to what other people have done to engage with the campaign, and maybe different creative ideas that different groups have come up with. So the idea of, you know, an article or a podcast, I think, is something that we actually haven't heard before on this. And I think that's so good for people to maybe think about that. Oh yeah, like put up the swag. We've loved, you know, air fresheners and fleet vehicles, for example, or things like that. But if it is something like, oh yeah, we do have some sort of intranet or publication or things like that, that we can also be promoting Buddy Up in, I think, you know, this is just a perfect example of that.
Yeah.
So moving to maybe a bit of a shift in gears here, you know, I've actually had this question as part of our interview segment before, but we've always sort of addressed it more peripherally. And that question is simply this: what is a woman's role within this male-focused campaign? We've always sort of given our answers, and maybe I can give a few of those after your answer here. But we thought it might be a good idea to actually have one of our female champions be able to tell us a little bit about how you've been able to engage with the campaign and what you see your role within it as.
Yeah, I think there's two main ways that anyone can find the campaign useful, no matter how they identify. And one is as a support person. Those 4 steps are so huge. And also just as a learning piece, like I had no idea the disparity was that great between men and women. It's offered me some strategies for identifying mental health challenges, kind of given me confidence to start those conversations. And I don't just mean for men. I've helped female counterparts using the same tactics. And it's also just been a really good like professional development tool, and or maybe personal development, I should say, branching off of mental health first aid. So there's the learning aspect, and then there's also the relatability of it. Like I know, again, we were speaking in generalizations, but a lot of those risk factors I can relate to. Like I grew up is sort of trying to push those emotions down, not talk about stuff, you know. And it took years to finally admit I needed help, and when I got it. So I think that regardless of how we identify, many of us can relate in some way to the campaign and what it's saying. And I think being on the advisory committee also, like with my personal experiences, I've had something to offer, even though I'm a woman.
100%. I think that perspective has been so valuable. And I love your answer there again, because I think what you've just said is actually a very real sort of real world example of what we've sort of been saying and hoping for this campaign. That, as you said, you know, it is very universal as far as both the ability to help with those 4 steps, but also the potential tendencies for not seeking help and things like that. Is that despite the fact that, you know, we have our stats that men die by suicide 3 times more often than women, and Buddy Up is focused on men, that often those commonalities are still there, and what we're actually teaching people about is quite transferable, I think. So yeah, that was just so encouraging to hear. I think also maybe the one thing I'll kind of key in on as well is something Seth said earlier, as far as Buddy Up being geared towards help offering rather than help seeking. So
yeah.
You know, the way I've started to explain it to people, and the way that makes sense in my head, is that, okay, if 1 in 20 people are considering suicide, what can the other 19 people be doing to recognize the potential warning signs, start that conversation and fill the gap. And I think, again, at risk of repeating myself here, but I think those 4 steps that we sort of lay out with buddyup are extremely helpful in any scenario. So, yeah, I'm rambling now, but I love that answer and thank you for that. So maybe we'll just wrap up with one final question here. But maybe just getting really practical, especially maybe for those who are new to the campaign and wondering about getting started. Do you have any tips or learnings or advice for how to start? We do have that freedom, but sometimes as much or as little can maybe be as overwhelming as having something specific. So
absolutely. Yeah, it's kind of daunting when you hear about some of the champions, what they're doing and stuff. I would say that I'm glad that the podcast and articles are kind of something unique that I've offered, but also like that's not what it needs to be. I think I've gotten more personal fulfillment from those one-on-ones where I hand somebody a sticker and they say, "What is this?" and we have a conversation. And I think what's cool and maybe room for improvement in our society is that it's still shocking people when I say the word suicide. So, this is buddyup. This is a campaign for men's suicide prevention, and people, in my experience, have been very shocked by that. And so those have been more fulfilling moments than the big stuff, the big articles, the big pictures of Clay in our magazine, because I don't get to see the people that you mentioned that are standing up by the posters and stuff. So I'd say, what's your first step? Well, your first step is to read the guide. Your second step is to order some swag and just start to pass it out and like I was going to actually say, if you don't have a water bottle, get one, because you're probably not drinking enough water anyways, but also you need something to put your sticker on. So Seth sort of stole that from me, but yeah, I think just start small, because small is big in the conversation of suicide prevention.
Absolutely. Yeah. Also, side note here, you're very right about water. Today before this, I had an all caps note in my calendar to drink water. And so just like you said, I think that's maybe a strength of buddyup even, is that you can sort of bring it into the everyday and get people wondering maybe what it's about and be able to share from there. So I think small, like you said, is sometimes bigger than you might think. So with that, I think that'll bring us to the conclusion of our official interview section here. Seth will be coming back with a few final slides that we'd like to show you. And then we'll finish up with a quick Q&A. So if anybody does have any questions they'd like asked, please do send them to myself or Seth, and we'll get to as many as we can. Thank you.
With the last few minutes here, I think we'll just go into a few questions. And so I have one that I'll answer, and then I'll pass it to you, Blaze, if you'd like to answer one. So my question was regarding the Power Up campaign. So where can you access it, and how do you connect with that? So I'll provide a link in the chat here for that actual pop-up. So if you click that, it will not only bring you to our map, but also to what we call a modal, kind of a sidebar menu. That one shows you when the campaign is. So Power Up starts on September 26th, and it's a week, so it goes to October 2nd. There's a share button there. That's one way you can participate. There are some examples of some activities and a little bit of information about that mini campaign. There will be more that will be released. So if you're signed up on our buddyup mailing list, you'll be getting an update of when there'll be more up-to-date information, and when some of the components like sharing your participation and the participation counter that will pop up on there, you'll be able to see that. So I invite you all to click that link and keep your eye open on our emails that we send out, because we will provide more updated information on that. Maybe I'll pass it to Blaze for another question.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Seth. So first question here, and maybe I'll jump in first, and then Deborah, if you have any thoughts at the end, feel free to jump in as well. The question here is, my workforce is largely male. I'm not sure if the campaign will be well received, talking about suicide, mental health, etc. Have you actually seen people engage with the campaign? Things like that. So I think the way I tend to answer that is that's absolutely a concern. When we talk to our focus groups, we we basically said, okay, how can we help? And they said, I'm more likely to help the guy next to me than I am to help myself, excuse me. And I think that resonates with a lot of people, either for themselves or for people that they know. That this, as we've talked about, that help offering or help seeking tendency rather is quite difficult. And so though it might be a concern that, okay, are men actually going to engage with this? I think that's exactly where our advisory committees and focus groups come in, is that something like that, where people tell us, okay, I would rather help my buddy than ask for help. We've incorporated that in such a way that we're actually keying in on the camaraderie. We're keying in on maybe that general tendency, rather than fighting against something that is a little bit harder. We're keying in on that brotherhood aspect of things. So yes, we have seen great engagement in many, especially male-dominated industries, such as construction and agriculture. So that's how I would answer that question. Deborah, did you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I'll just add my personal experience was I felt very much the same, very nervous to bring it up to the Alberta beef producers, and I did anyways, because I said, listen, if you're not interested, I'm still going to be a champion in one way or another. And it was like a resounding yes, let's do it, let's help. So what's like the worst case scenario, you ask, and you're a champion on your own, but I think sometimes we're surprised.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's really encouraging to hear. And again, I've said this before in these meetings, but as far as bringing it to your company organization, so many of our champions who we've seen really do incredible things, it started with sort of just one employee saying, hey, I think this is really valuable, and taking it to someone within the organization. And then it actually has been rolled out on a far bigger scale from there. So I think, again, to your point at the end of our conversation, Deborah, sometimes we think things are small, but they can actually snowball in quite an incredible way. So I don't actually have any more questions here myself. Seth, did you have anything?
Yeah, I got one more, and maybe we'll end with this one, as I see we're coming up on time. So the question was, how do you decide the activities for the quarterly mini campaigns, and do you see a greater significance in those activities for bringing awareness to men's suicide and supporting men? Yeah, so a couple answers there. Deciding the activity. So sorry, how do we frame this? The activities are suggestions. So we kind of looked at different areas that we wanted to focus on. So for example, Power Up is focusing on strengthening your body and mind. And then all the activities within there are just suggestions. So you are able to adapt those to whatever works within your group. As I mentioned before, we have a lot of different companies, organizations, groups, or even individuals that are involved. So allowing it to be open enough that everyone can kind of form it to something that works for them. But also an important part is, one benefit of these mini campaigns is there are opportunities for all of our champions to kind of have a unified time where we're all working or focusing on the same sort of thing, learning more about suicide prevention, talking with our buddies, having those deeper conversations. And these activities, we feel they offer opportunities, one, to check up on your buddy. If you're inviting them out and they're not coming, you know, there may be a deeper chat that needs to happen there. Maybe something's up and, you know, there's an opportunity to converse with them. But also when you're participating in the conversations or in the activities, a lot of the times there are things where you're doing something else. Men, like I mentioned before, they don't want to look at you when they're talking and they want to be doing something else. Maybe you're building something, or here, you know, for power up, maybe you're exercising, maybe you're chatting while lifting some weights or going for a run or whatever it may be. You're doing something else, but you're able to kind of have those opportunities to connect and talk one with another. So yeah, hopefully that answers the question. And if you'd like a bit more of an answer, feel free to reach out. Again, Blaze and myself are willing to help anyone with any questions. So it's just Blaze at suicideinfo.ca or Seth at suicideinfo.ca.